Well, hi, everybody. My name is Melissa C. I'm a recovered compulsive overeater. I am in New York, freezing, freezing cold New York. And the holidays are, coming up. They're right upon us. And really happy to see people here tonight. I think, this particular subject that we're going to be jumping into in a moment, step 12, is where we receive immunity from the punishing effects of being a compulsive eater. And so for me, with the holidays right upon me, I know that it is not time to lay back, to sort of take it easy, to, well, I'm real busy with the preparations of the holiday, or, it's actually the opposite. Because what we have, what I have to contend with is a subtle foe. That's what we're told. For us, alcohol, food is a subtle foe. And a subtle foe is an enemy that doesn't quite appear like an enemy, right? It looks like it's harmless. And I know for me, holidays, and I think for many people, it would seem harmless
Oh,
to have
must be
an
broken.
extra,
Okay. Well, that's very
an
strange.
extra spoon, an extra bite, sloppy weighing and measuring, those actions, those are the subtle foes. And my experience has been in working with others for a while, is that the food, it never comes, the binge never first arrives as a cupcake. I mean, I always share that. It does not. Relapse does not begin with a cupcake. It starts with actions, like I would say it's the sideways shuffle out. It's like a little letting go of this here, letting go of that there. And I would say that a real cautionary, bit of tale that I would want to give, a little bit of like warning, 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 is um, it's lessening up on the discipline and structured nature of what's required for recovery on holidays. That for me seems to be a real subtle way that the disease, you could sort of invite it back into your life. And so I'll just share with you, for this particular holiday, I'll be home. When I am not home for the holidays, I treat my abstinence and my recovery just like any other day. I pray and meditate in the morning. If there's a live meeting that I have a commitment to listen to daily, I listen to it. You know, um, my food is weighed and measured, doesn't really matter. I bring it. If I have to bring it, I bring it. If I can eat what's at someone else's house, if I'm into that phase of my recovery, right? Some people are in that early period where they cannot do that in recovery. But I am able generally to go to people's homes, provided I know specifically what's in their food and I know what they're serving. And if I don't, then I bring my backup food. No big deal. Nobody really cares. And I bring my scale. Because what I found is that for normal people, and I know this isn't step 12, but I just feel like a need to sort of say that because we are days, we're just like a day or two away from the start of the holiday. And I would say most people who return to the food around the holidays, they might not binge on Christmas. They might not. What they're more likely to do is to ease up just a little bit on Christmas. And, the idea, or on any holiday, right? Whatever holiday it is, they would sort of just ease up a little bit and say, you know what? Um, this is part of how we celebrate, right? This is how my family celebrates. And the nostalgia factor sort of zones in. Like, this is what we do in our family. It's our tradition, right? So we let people let go just a little bit, maybe not binging. And then the 26th happens. That's when the binge occurs. And at that point, it's like, I don't know why I binged. And my experience is because you oftentimes invited the subtle foe back in. And chances are, in close proximity with our families, God love our families, but there's nothing like a day with your family to like revisit resentments again. right? Old stories again. Add a couple of bites, couple of extra bites. It's like it's the perfect storm. It's the head of the perfect storm. So that's why I say, like, this talk about step 12 is so important right now because this is the only immunity we have to offer. And so, working with others, whether you yourself are in a position to be sponsoring or whether you yourself are not there yet, you can still stay close with others and be useful with others as well. So, last time, and we're looking in the AA 12 and 12. And so, last time we had gotten up to, we were on page 114, but I want to just go back for 1 minute um, because there are three parts to this particular step of step 12. The three parts are one, the spiritual awakening, two, the carrying the message to the other addicts, and three, the practicing these principles in all our affairs. So I'm just going to quickly say, like, a spiritual awakening is this. I'm going to read it again. I've read it repeatedly, but I really think it's so important. It's on page 106. This is the big question. What do you mean when you talk about a spiritual awakening? Like, what does that even mean? Well, the answer comes on that page and it continues on to page 107. It says, when a man or woman has had a spiritual awakening, the most important meaning is that he has now become able to do, feel, and believe that which he could not do before on his unaided strength and resources alone. He has been granted a gift, which amounts to a new state of consciousness and being. He has been set on a path which tells him he's really going somewhere, that life is not a dead end, not something to be endured or mastered. In a very real sense, he has been transformed. And then it further goes on to say that he finds himself in possession of a degree of honesty, tolerance, unselfishness, peace of mind, and love of which he had thought himself quite incapable. So that's what it means, right? To have a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps. Okay, so now we're jumping back into the practicing these principles in all our affairs. That's really what we're up to. And we had on page 114, it says our basic troubles, and this is in the AA 12 and 12, and just kind of remind people which text we're looking at. Our basic troubles are the same as everyone else's. But when an honest effort is made to practice these principles, the principles and the steps in all our affairs, well grounded AA seem to have the ability, by God's grace, to take these troubles in stride and turn them into demonstrations of faith. And so we are not promised lives without difficulties. It's I say, like, life gets lifey, right? Sometimes life gets lifey. It starts presenting things to us. Recovery does not mean that everything is perfect, but that we have the ability to somehow live through life's difficulties. And, you know, um, we can take the big lumps as they come. And, and my own experience is that um, I saw people, like, even in the pandemic, right? I saw what happened to my coworkers who did not have the 12 steps in their lives. And the way that they went through this pandemic, I couldn't believe some of the things that I saw from people who were professionals, who I worked with, who, like, looked like they fell apart. They fell apart, I mean, everybody was talking at that time about how much drinking people were doing. Non-alcoholics were, like, consuming bottles and bottles of wine, eating. People, everybody seemed to put on weight. I remember going to meetings, virtual meetings from work, And like professionals were in there. No offense to anybody in your pajamas tonight. This is a 12-step meeting. We're okay. But there were professionals having meetings in their PJs. And I thought, what in the world has happened to these people? And I found that those of us that had a strong recovery program, we seem to take that hard time pretty much in stride. I wasn't losing my mind. I remember being in the supermarket and someone like lost their head over toilet paper. They were having like a hissy fit, crying over toilet paper. And I remember thinking, yeah, I'm going to be okay. Like, if there's no toilet paper, I think we have some tissues or napkins in the house. I'll figure it out. Right. Like, but other people were losing their minds. And I've had this sort of experience in my family as well on a more personal level with my mom's decline and her dementia. And I see the way that my siblings, God, I love them, but they are experiencing it differently than I am. And I believe it's because that, I have the capability to take these troubles in stride because of being a practitioner of the 12 steps. I think we're really blessed. We're really lucky, you know? And so we can take these big lumps as they come. And then here's the thing, but more difficult are sometimes the lesser problems. That's what it says here. The pebble in our shoes kind of problems. We often discover a greater challenge, it says right here in the text, in the lesser and more continuous problems in life. Our answer is in still more spiritual development. So even my seemingly minor problems, they have the potential to do a great deal of harm if I don't look at them and use them as opportunities to grow. And I would say, like, I was just sharing with someone before the meeting that I have this sort of this brain that minimizes my discomfort. Something will come up and it's like, oh, it's not a big deal. Ah, it's not a big deal. That's not a big deal. And it's like, do that enough. And I have an avalanche of not a lot of big deals that have now accumulated themselves. And it becomes overwhelming. And so how often do we ignore the little issues, the small things? You know, if I don't look at them as opportunities for growing, I'm in trouble. And for years, I had two modes. My two modes were this: denial or obsession. I denied it, denied it. No big deal. Ignore it and deny until it grew so big that I could no longer close my eyes to it. And then it was the only thing I could see or think about. And so for my minor issues, I I still take them through step 10, right? When people say, "Oh, that's not really worthy of a 10 step." It's not really worthy of me looking at it through step 10. It is for me. It is for me. Um, and so my minor issues, I still take them through the process. If I don't, then what happens is they attach themselves to other small issues and they grow into something huge and overwhelming. And then I don't even know what hit me. It seems like, overwhelming, big. All right. So now let's talk about our instincts, right? And this is on page 114. It says, as we grow spiritually, we find that our old attitudes towards our instincts need to undergo drastic revisions. Our desires for emotional security and wealth, for personal prestige and power, for romance and for family satisfactions, all these have to be tempered and redirected. We have learned that the satisfaction of instinct cannot be the sole end and aim of our lives. My life cannot be spent satisfying myself and my instincts. If we place instincts first, we've got the cart before the horse. We shall be pulled backward into disillusions. But when we are willing to place spiritual growth first, then and only then do we have a real chance. And I think, okay, they talked about the satisfaction of romance, of prestige, of things going smooth in my family. That has to be tempered and redirected, right? Those desires, not saying that you should not want those things, but they need to be tempered and redirected. And so what does that mean, tempered? It's if something is tempered, if like glass is tempered, it means that glass, that object, has improved elasticity, like by heating it and then cooling it, and improved resiliency. That's what it means to be tempered, to have improved resiliency. So my instincts cannot own me. We are often so incredibly concerned with our desires. This is where I really say, like, I have to be not so sensitive and demanding of getting everything met for me. I have to be okay with not being okay, with everything not being okay. And, you know, so what are the instincts that I can't have own me? Well, my emotional security, that ability to feel happy and satisfied and steady. Here's what I found out: my pursuit of being happy, if I spend my time pursuing happiness, I'm in serious trouble because it's like a moving target. But if I pursue myself in following God's will, I actually have longer lasting satisfaction, right? My monetary security, if I'm focused solely on money, getting my financial needs met, feeling okay, securing money, my romantic security, prestige and power. These are like some of the instincts, right? If these are tempered, it means that I have to ride the storms of not having every one of my needs met and exceeded, right? By all people at all times. And so I've got this example of like of social needs, right? Of that wanting to belong. And that has been like my boo, I think we all have these stories we tell ourselves. That's like my boo-hoo poor me story. I'm gonna say it like that. Because I grew up with this idea that I didn't belong. Like I'm the youngest of five kids. My siblings were all born really close together. I felt like there was always this club that they belonged to that was like not really for me because I was the baby. I was like sort of excused from that. And that is in my own head. That's my own story. My sister has a totally different story about our growing up experience. My brother's got one too. This is the story I told myself and believed. And I have experienced it and practiced it everywhere I go. And, by the way, if you become morbidly obese in high school, all of a sudden you gain 100 pounds, you probably feel at times like normal people, like you don't belong either. And so that story is like in there. It's part of my DNA. And I can still, at almost 56 years old, I can still believe that story today at work, right? And I actually have had experiences at work where I have some colleagues that, yeah, I don't really fit. They're not like, we're not each other's people, like we just sort of have a different way, some of them. And I have wanted so much for them to like want me hanging around, right? To feel that need. And um, what I found out is that my sponsor asked me one time, like, why do you care so much what they think? Like, why do you care? Do you do you really like that person? And I was like, no, but that's besides the point. And she was like, wait, you want them to like you, but you actually don't really like them. And I was like, yeah. And then I realized how ridiculous it was to have this need to belong everywhere, right? I don't belong everywhere. Guess what? Nobody's going to belong everywhere. You can't, you know. And someone also had explained to me one time that while it made sense, like in the evolution of people, in how people formed in societies to belong, right? Because if you belonged, then there was a better chance of your needs getting met, right? Like if you belong to a particular group, you would perhaps have a warm spot by the fire, or they would throw you some extra meat for your kids, right? That kind of a thing. And here's my problem. I got a seat by the fire. I have places where I belong, but I don't have a seat by everybody's fire, right? I don't have a spot everywhere. I don't, and so that has to be tempered. That neediness to belong, it's got to be tempered. Page 115 says this: after we come into AA, if we go on growing, our attitudes and actions towards security, emotional security, and financial security commenced to change profoundly. We changed the way we hunger for status, either the status of being with the right people or having money. Our demand for emotional security for our own way had constantly thrown us into unworkable relations with other people. Though we were sometimes quite unconscious of this, the result had always been the same. Either we had tried to play God and dominate those about us, or we had insisted on being overly dependent upon them, right? That's what happens when we have this need for emotional security. We make people do what we want so we feel okay, or we walk around trying to please everybody so we can feel okay. And it's common that we have the habit where we place, unrealistic demands on people. That's pretty common. I make their behavior, their successes, their affections my God. I start to worship that. If my very happiness and sense of security is riding on the backs of how others behave, I just went from being in bondage to the food to now I'm in bondage to other people, right? Other people can behave however they want. My emotional security has to remain intact. And, you know, as a parent, I remembered, when my daughter, especially, and my son now is like in his teen years, but especially when my daughter was going through her teen years, when my happiness and sense of security was like on the back of a 16-year-old, oh my God, was I in trouble? And I remember that time thinking, if they're not doing okay, how could I possibly be happy? And if they're not happy, how could I possibly be? And I thought that was the mark of a good mom, right? A good mom can't be happy if her kid's not happy. That actually is a really unkind burden to place on the back of another person, because now not only are they responsible for their own happiness, but now they have to carry the burden of mine. And that actually, I found out in this program, nope, I'm actually part of my step 12 is I am happy regardless of what's going on about me. My happiness, my sense of satisfaction comes when I live in agreement with God's will for me. That's what truly gives me sustained meaning, purpose, and real joy. You know, it says here on the bottom of page 115, we had refused to learn the very hard lesson that over dependence upon people is unsuccessful because all people are fallible and even the best of them will sometimes let us down, right? People will absolutely let us down at some point. If I spend my life dependent on people and I make their actions, thoughts, and affections my focus, then I am shooting for a moving target. That target is always going to be moving. And I say, this is something that I've often shared with sponsees. I've had one time sponsee said to me, I feel like you're so busy. I don't know that you'll be able to you know, give enough of you to me. And I was like, oh yeah, you're right. I won't. Don't worry about it. I am absolutely going to let you down. Like, please do not place your dependence upon me. I will do my best to help you. Put your hand in the source that you can always depend on. And rest assured, that won't be me. I will mess up. You know, trust me, I will let you down at some point because I'm human. I try not to, but that's the truth, right? So then what's the solution? If if we can't be overly dependent on other people, right? Page 116 says we would need to give constantly of ourselves without demands for repayment. Wait, what? Yep. I actually have to constantly give of myself without even thinking about what I'm going to get back. And when we persistently did this, we gradually found that people were attracted to us as never before. And even if they failed us, we could be understanding and not too seriously affected. So it's like, mm, I can show up, I can give of myself without thinking they have to pay me back on some level, right? I'll do this for them, they'll do that for me. No, I just do what I believe I'm supposed to do, right? Page 116, middle of the page answers this because we rely on the best possible source for emotional stability, which is God Himself. That's the best possible source. We rely on God Himself. If we really depended upon God, we couldn't very well play God to our fellows, nor would we feel the urge wholly to rely on human protection and care. These were the new attitudes that finally brought many of us inner strength and peace that could not be deeply shaken by the shortcomings of others or by any calamity not of our own making. And I would tell you, because step 12 is also going to talk about marriages. And I would say this. I've been married to my husband. It's going to be 28 years. And we've been in a relationship for over 30 years. So we have that. And I would say we have a really, really good relationship. My relationship with my husband improved tremendously through the steps because I love him dearly, but I am not overly dependent upon him for my happiness. Doesn't mean I don't rely on this man. We're in a partnership in this. And I know God help me if something happens to him, right? I know I'll be okay. I know I would be okay. And I think when we have that capacity to feel that way, we can love very differently. And I think loving in that way without the neediness is a much deeper love, is a much more affection because he is not responsible for my happiness. I have other avenues that I can rely on to feel happy, right? Step 12, again, we'll talk about marriages, and many of us find that the steps fixes the damages and that our homes are happy. Because page 117 says this. It's by eliminating the severe emotional twists that have so often stemmed from alcoholism. So our addiction, right, caused severe emotional twists. Not actually the alcohol did not cause the emotional twist, but the ism, right? It says the ism. The ism, our natures, we are severely. So it's not like, oh, when I was in the food, I was wrecking havoc. It's not the food that caused the havoc in my marriage, in my life. It was the way that I was living, it was my belief systems, it was my behavior, caused problems and equally caused me to eat, right? It's sometimes we hear people say the food caused the problem in the marriage or the food caused the problem in the home, but it's the problems that caused, right, the food, that caused the turning to the food. And so our natures are severely emotional, but when we straighten out spiritually, we also straighten out emotionally. and then we become better partners. And let's be clear that this is not an overnight affair, right? But it's the work of a lifetime. I 100% mess up. I'm like listening to the walking up the stairs now. I'm like, oh, boy, I better be honest. I absolutely mess up. I definitely screw up. Page 118 cautions this. We may become so wrapped up in AA or OA and new friends that we are inconsiderately away from home more than when we drank or ate. And when we see them in happy, we recommend the 12 steps to our families and try to teach them how to live. And that was like one of the things like, oh, yeah, we start telling other people how to practice, other people who may or may not have this problem, that they, ought to practice these 12 steps. And that's arrogant and certainly something I have been guilty of for sure. And we're reminded on page 119 that realizing what our partners have endured and now fully understanding how much we did to damage them and our children, we nearly always take up our marriage responsibilities with a willingness to repair what we can and to accept what we can't. Persistently trying all of AA 12 steps in the home, often with fine results. We commence to behave like a partner instead of like a bad boy or bad child, right? And when I read that, I think, oh my gosh, I look back at my tantrum throwing, like a petulant child, that I would throw temper tantrums, my pouty behavior, my like I would get quiet and pouty like a child, my outright refusal to do my fair share, right? That was the way that I behaved. And it's clear that in recovery, I have a lot of growing up to do. Right? That was the conclusion I came to. I have a lot of growing up to do.
In New York City,
And that
he was having a good time resting like this.
okay, mute that person. So the other thing is that um the 12 steps and the practices of the 12 steps, these spiritual principles, when we practice them in all our affairs, when we practice them in the home, it means we practice them. We don't demand the people around us practice them. And an area that I know that I messed up was my my daughter, especially. I did this to my husband as well, but would bring a problem to me, and I would treat her like she was my sponsee. Like I would say, okay, now what's your part? Like she would tell me someone was mean to her or someone did something, and I would say, now I'm sure you had a part in it. What do you think you did to start the ball rolling? I mean, like I use that jargon with her. And she was a kid at the time. And my intentions were, of course, to be good, right? To be helpful. After a while, I found a skill set that changed my life, right? And I just wanted to sort of instruct her, pass it on, give her that. But what she got from that was, you never take my side. Why don't you take my side? And she did, communicate that to me at a later date, not in a pleasant way, in like a typical teenage tantrumy, like hot mess of a way. She was like, you never take my side, ever, ever. And now I look back and I'm like, she's right, and I can only say I'm sorry so much, right? Because the truth is I can't go back in time. But now when she tells me something, I just listen, and I don't tell her, I don't try to present it from her employer's perspective or what her wife might think. And I just listen. I say, gosh, that sounds really difficult. And that's about it. I just, it sounds really difficult, or I ask her this question. Hmm, what have you felt like? Have you ever had this problem before? What helped you the last time you had this problem? And then it's like, then she has the opportunity to kind of work it out on her own. And I find that's like the best possible way that I can kind of arm her with her own, like remind her of her own a hidden source of power. And so page 119 also addresses the single people who look to have relationships with one another in the fellowship, because that happens here too. We are cautioned against love at first sight. Like, be careful. The prospective partners need to be solid AAs and long enough acquainted to know that their compatibility at spiritual, mental, and emotional levels is a fact and not merely wishful thinking. This also holds true for those who marry and connect outside of the rooms, right? So it's a generally practiced rule that early in recovery dating is discouraged until the fellow has worked through the steps, has some recovery under their belt, and they are clear and strong. And I would say it like this, early, you're still under the bondage of the food, right? Food is your master, the disease is your master. Well, how are you going to pick a healthy partner if you have a master who wants the worst for you, right? So it's like we're told, make sure that you're really living in agreement with the true master. And that, part of, I think, one of the beautiful gifts of recovery is people, when they're no longer being mastered by food, by their addiction, they find out who they really are and what they really like. And then they can actually pick a partner where they're picking the partner, not the food is picking the partner for them, right? We don't want to find ourselves in relationships with people who we chose them because they let us practice our disease easily, right? That would not be a healthy relationship. Page 120 talks about those that never marry, right? And that they can be very happy and satisfied with their lives too. Marriage is not necessarily the requirement, right, for happiness. Can AAs offer them satisfactions of similar worth and durability? Yes, whenever they try hard to seek them out. Surrounded by so many AA friends, these so called loners tell us they no longer feel alone. In partnership with others, women and men, they can devote themselves to any number of ideas, people, and constructive projects. Free of marital responsibilities, they can participate in enterprises which would be denied to family men and women. We daily see such members render prodigies of service and receive great in return. And I have witnessed that. I have dear fellows in this program who are single, who are not married, and they give an enormous amount of service happily. It's not like, oh, that's just a contingency prize, right? This OA thing for them. It's just sort of like, oh, well, if I can't get married, I may as well do this. No, it actually has become truly their great source of joy and their powerhouses of, of service, right? So now what about money, right? Now we're going to get into money. We're not into marriage. Now let's talk about money. Page 120 to 121. Money was the symbol of pleasure and self importance. 121 says, upon entering AA, these attitudes were sharply reversed, often going much too far in the opposite direction. Financial importance was no longer our principal aim. We now clamored for material security. So we swing from spending like crazy to major fears about money. If plagued with financial fears, we are forgetting four things. There's four things we're told we're forgetting. One, our abilities, God given gifts and talents that we can now tap into. Free of the addiction, we can actually figure out and tap into our strength. Two, that we have a fellowship to help us find opportunities, right? It says here, like, even better jobs, so long as we deserve this help. And I know of many times where fellows offered one another interviewing assistance. Like I've no sponsees who are well practiced. They interview people all the time and they were offering interviewing tips for other people, career counseling, and even opportunities for employment. Like that's okay to do that. Um, and that three, everyone has struggles. So we forget the actual or potential financial insecurity of every human being in this world, right? It's not that we are free of financial insecurity. We're free of the fear of financial insecurity. Sometimes financial insecurity is a very real thing, but we no longer walk around terrified of it. And four, worst of all, we forget God, right? In all of this, if we're worrying about money, we might be forgetting God. In many money matters, we had faith only in ourselves and not too much of that. The soul meant, of course, that we were still far off balance. When it looked like a mere means of getting money rather than an opportunity for service, when the acquisition of money for financial independence looked more important than a right dependence upon God, we were still the victims of unreasonable fears. In these fears, which would make a serene and useful existence at any financial level quite impossible. Right? So the 12 steps can promise us acceptance of our financial situations. We don't feel like we have to have anything big to prove anymore. Page 122. It did not matter too much what our material condition was, but it did matter what our spiritual condition was. Money gradually became our servant and not our master. Right? We found that freedom from fear was more important than freedom from want. Right? So we are no longer afraid. And another problem we're cautioned against is our feelings of self importance. Page 123 talks about doctors, who studied the personality traits of addicts and found most of the alcoholics under investigation were still childish, emotionally sensitive, and grandiose. Ouch. We want more than our fair share of attention. Yep. Fame, money, and leadership. We are overly sensitive. Feelings hurt easily and believe that we are meant to be somebody, right? That's like a common thing. I'm supposed to be somebody. They say that most kids at some point believe that they could be famous athletes, right? By the way, if I ask my second graders, they all say that they're going to be like Messi. They're all into soccer. Everybody is going to be the next Messi, right? Um, they're going to be somebody. They say, they're going to be the movie star. They're going to be wealthy beyond all measure. Even the president, right? Little kids, they're going to be the president. Going to be this, going to be that. The addict doesn't merely believe in the possibility, but actually feels entitled to that possibility, like entitlement to it, to extravagant achievements. We simply had to be number one people to cover up our deep lying inferiorities, right? But the steps make us right sized, and we get our feelings of self esteem not by outward accomplishments, but by esteemable acts, right? Self esteem comes, we start feeling better about ourselves, not when we get recognition for the great things we do, but when we are doing kind, caring, great things, right? Those are the real great things. Being useful and of service without a badge or medal, just doing it, right? Page 124, still more wonderful is the feeling that we do not have to be specially distinguished among our fellows in order to be useful and profoundly happy. Not many of us can be leaders of prominence, nor do we wish to be. Service gladly rendered, obligations squarely met, troubles well accepted or solved with God's help. So I'm either going to accept my troubles as they will, as they are, or accept God's help with them. The knowledge that at home or in the world outside, we are partners in a common effort. The well understood fact that in God's sight, all human beings are important. The proof that love freely given surely brings a full return. The certainty that we are no longer isolated and alone in self constructed prisons. The surety that we need no longer be square pegs in round holes, but can fit and belong in God's scheme of things. These are the permanent and legitimate satisfactions of right living, for which no amount of pomp and circumstance, no heap of material possessions could possibly be substitutes. True ambition is not what we thought it was. True ambition is the deep desire to live usefully and walk humbly under the grace of God. And with that,